Hello there guys, this is Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space, and I am so excited to bring you my October wrap-up and my November TBR. November is going to be such a great month. October was such a great month of reading. So excited for it. So, I've already done at least 2 TBRs, maybe 3 by this point for November, so I'll start with the October wrap-up, but you've already seen some of the things, at least, that I'm planning to read for November. So, let's jump into the wrap-up. So the first thing, and I'm counting some things as nonfiction here because I want to make sure that I'm imbibing as much nonfiction and like current events and things like that as I am fiction. So certain things, like the first thing I'm going to mention is an easy podcast class called Iyagi, which is a Korean easy podcast through a website called Talk to Me in Korean, which is how I'm learning Korean. It's through their website. So this is an easy podcast class where 2 people are talking about a topic. So basically it's like a conversational podcast. And they would have the transcripts in Korean and English along with some vocabulary words. And I just loved going through it and gathering some vocabulary and just listening. I feel like input is so important as far as language learning. So I was really proud and happy to finish this podcast class. So that's the first thing that I finished this month. Next I also finished This Is What It Sounds Like by Susan Rogers and Ogas, which was actually last month's book club pick for Victoria's Patreon, but I just finished off the last little bit of the audiobook in October. So that's okay. I'm not putting this really in order for some reason. This is all out of order. Oh, maybe because I finished multiple fiction things at the end of September. So I finished multiple nonfiction things at the beginning of October to make up for all the fiction that I finished in September. So I also finished Easy Korean Reading for Beginners, which I don't have here with me, but that's another book by Talk to Me in Korean. And that's a great book about stories that are actually like realistic kind of things that go on in Korea that they think you should know about. Like, for example, company dinners was one of the topics, where Korean companies will often have mandatory dinners very frequently so that you can get to know your coworkers. And I learned a bunch of vocabulary about working in Korea and companies and stuff like that, which is important because a lot of people are learning Korean for that very reason. In fact, I'm really excited about this. I just trained to become a literacy tutor for adults at my library. It's a free training. I think probably a lot of libraries do something like this. So if you're ever interested, you could always go look and see if your library has a literacy department. But yeah, so I got the training done and they asked if I speak any other languages. And I was like, not yet, but I'm in my 3rd year of working on Korean and I'm planning to carry that out to fluency. And they said they could use that where I live, which I was so surprised. I was like, I don't know any Korean people where I live, but there are apparently Koreans here who need adult ESL language learning tutors. So yeah, they said they can use my Korean. So I'm going to be really focusing on learning Korean so that I can use it for literacy tutoring. I'm so excited. I have a purpose now. It's not just for fun anymore. So yeah, finish that. And next, I finished Tress by Brandon Sanderson. I will pull this one up. I will pull up a picture of this one because y'all might actually want to see that. So I'm sure the Talk to Me in Korean stuff, if you're interested in learning Korean, you can look that up. But as far as Tress of the Emerald Sea, this is a retelling of The Princess Bride by Brandon Sanderson, and it's following Tress, a girl who has, I forget what color her hair is. I think it's blonde, whereas everybody else, or maybe it's brown and everybody else has blonde hair. I can't remember exactly. But she lives on an emerald ocean, and it's emerald because of these things called spores. The ocean is made up of these spores, and spores are these green things that will explode into gigantic vines if they have any contact with water or anything wet. So it's like the opposite of an ocean. But ships ride on these spores, and Tress lives on an island in the middle of this emerald ocean, and she's stuck there. And she tries to be happy about it and have a good attitude, even though she doesn't really want to be stuck there. But she's not allowed to leave because the king of their country will not let people leave the island because he knows that everybody would just leave. But it's a really important shipping island. It's a really important place as far as shipping goes. So he doesn't want them to leave. So yeah, it's about how and why Tress leaves the island. And I enjoy this so much. It doesn't even really matter, the subject matter. I always enjoy Brandon Sanderson's books because of his characterization, and I just think his humor is great. So I enjoy this very much, even though it's not like a new favorite because, yeah, I don't really think I like sea stories that much. I think I could. There's something really fascinating to me about the ocean, but things that are set like exclusively on an ocean almost, I think is probably, or on a ship. Maybe it's just being confined to a ship. I don't really like that so much. But I loved things like the Dawn Treader. So I don't know, maybe, I guess there's been books that I loved that were set on the ocean for the most part that I loved. And actually I have a book on my TBR this month that's set in the ocean for Cryptid Readathon. I'm so excited for that. Okay, anyways, finished that. Really enjoyed it. Next, Traffic, which was a book I've been talking about a lot. So I probably don't need to talk about it very much here. But basically, this is a book by Ben Smith who talks about the development of certain news outlets online as those outlets, as online news was becoming a thing. The kind of people who were online, the kind of people that were doing online news and why. He talks about two really big names. The one behind Gawker Media, Nick Denton, and the other one is Jonah Peretti, who is, he ended up becoming affiliated with the HuffPost. And yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting. I mean, it's definitely like, I feel like it's bent a certain way politically a little bit, but you know, that's okay. Everybody has their opinions. So I really enjoyed learning, sort of from an insider's perspective about how those places developed. And he definitely had some things to say about the development of online news. So the subtitle is Genius, Rivalry, and the Delusion in the billion-dollar race to go viral. So it's all about how these news places tried to go viral, the kind of things that they did to go viral. And it was some crazy stuff, like sharing celebrity sex tapes and stuff like that, and porn and stuff like that. It was fascinating, and I really enjoyed learning about it. Okay, and I finished some spooky books this month because October, I just really enjoyed going spooky this October. I don't feel like I've done that properly in a while. But Kevin and I listened to Goosebumps Monsterblood by R.L. Stine. This was my first Goosebumps novel. This was one of Kevin's favorite Goosebumps novels as a kid. And I can see why. It was so fun. So it's following a boy who has to stay with an older babysitter that his father also had to stay with when he was a kid. And he has to stay with them for like a couple weeks, I think. And he ends up buying this monster blood that keeps growing. It just starts growing and growing, and it becomes a big problem because it seems to be alive. And so, yeah, I really enjoyed this. We're listening to another one right now, and I'm just like reveling in it. It's so fun. I don't think I would have probably liked Goosebumps as a kid, but now as an adult, I'm just like, yeah, it's like just a little bit creepy. I'm really loving it. So I also finished the Book of Ruth in the Bible. It's one, I don't know who it's by, but it's in the Bible, and it's about a woman who, her husband dies and her father-in-law dies, and all the men in the family die, including two of her brothers-in-law. And so all the women gather together and they're like mourning all of this. It's set, like, the beginning is set outside of Israel. So all of these women are living somewhere else. And Ruth, the woman that the book is named after, is a Moabitess. And she kind of gathers together with the other women. And the mother, Naomi, the mother-in-law, she says, you guys need to go back to your own gods and your own families and find some new men to marry, basically. And I'm going to go back to Israel as a widow. And Ruth is the only of the two of the girls. All the girls say, no, we want to stay with you. But Naomi convinces two of the girls to go back to their families. So Ruth says, I would rather die than be separated from you. So Ruth goes with Naomi back to Israel, sort of takes up Naomi's god, starts serving him and serving Naomi, really. She's trying to help Naomi stay alive. So basically there are two widows in Israel in a time when it's really tough to be a widow in ancient history. But Israel had certain laws that would make it easier for a widow to survive. And some of those laws included gleaning from the fields. So taking some of the extra grains from the fields of wheat and things like that. And so one of the people that they end up gleaning from becomes what's called something redeemer. I can't remember the exact word at the moment, but it's really a love story, but it's also about Naomi making sure that she's Ruth making sure that she's taking care of her mother-in-law. Their love for each other is just so sweet. I just love it. And it's a very Hufflepuff book, and it's about how God cares for everybody and takes care of everybody. Ruth ends up being in I think the bloodline of Jesus in some of the biblical genealogies. Ruth is mentioned, even though she's not an Israelite. So I just love that. It's a great story. It's a romance. It's only 4 chapters. It's super short. Highly recommended. If you've never read anything from the Bible, I think you would find it really refreshing and fun. So the next thing that I finished is The 4-Story Mistake by Madeleine Engel. No, I'm sorry, Elizabeth Enright. And I'm pulling it up here. This is a book that I read with Tiffany and her daughter Claire. It's a favorite of mine from childhood. This whole series is the Melendi series. This is book 2. So the first book is them in New York City, and it's about it follows the 4 kids as they go and spend their allowances. They pool all of their allowances so they can each have a really special day out. And so that was such a fun book. And this is the second book when they moved to the country. And I just think that the country writing in this series is just the best. I think that's why I love it so much. I'm starting to lose my voice, so hopefully I can finish this video. Anyways, yeah, this was so good. Tiffany and I and Claire read it together, and we just discussed it, and we all loved it. And yeah, I loved it so much. So I don't really want to get into all the specifics because that would kind of ruin it, but the writing is just so delightful. It's so reminiscent of childhood. It just really reminds you what it's like to feel like a child. I read them as a kid, and I loved them as a kid. And I read them as an adult, and now I love them as an adult. So good experience all around. The next thing that I finished was Barbarians, which was a children's book about the barbarians of Eurasia, and I enjoyed learning about them, like, just a little bit. It was a really fun book. I don't remember it was in one of my vlogs. I don't remember though what the series was called or anything. I remember that the publisher was the Creative Company, so I should have looked that. I could have looked it up by that, but it's the Creative Company Barbarians. Really fascinating book. I thought it was written really well for low reading level, high interest history. Like, the way it was written was really interesting. Like, so on one page, the words were written in a spiral, so you have to keep, like, turning the page, so that you can read it. And it, like, ranked the top 5 barbarians and, stuff like that. It was fun to learn about what who the Vandals were and who the Franks were and stuff like that. I never studied European history in school, so at least not that I can really remember. So that was interesting. I enjoyed that. Goths, Visigoths, all those guys. So next I finished Carmilla, which is a female vampire story, and it's billed as lesbian, but if you're going into it looking for that, I don't think you're going to really be super pleased. I mean, it's really a great story. It's super creepy. I loved it. I found it so fun. This was Victoria's Patreon book club pick for October, and I never would have picked it up because people were just like, oh yeah, it's a lesbian classic, and I've never actually read one of those. But because I'm a Christian, I was like, well, I mean, it's probably not going to be anything that I agree with. Even that's not a reason to not read something necessarily, but I just was like, well, I just wasn't really sure what to expect. But because it was for Patreon book club, I picked it up and I loved it. So yeah, it's not a positive representation of lesbianism because it's written in the Victorian period. So I guess it was silly of me to like expect that going in. So that was surprising. It was definitely like this lesbian vampire was a sexual predator, basically, and an actual predator. Like, she killed her victims. So there you have it. But it was like the lore, it was such an involved lore. Like, the vampires are amphibious, and it was fascinating. Like, the reason, like, how she became one is because she was like a suicide victim, and so, like, that's how she was haunted by a demon, and that's how she became. I mean, the lore is like fascinating behind Carmilla. I loved this story. It was so good. So highly recommend if you're looking for some vampire stories. And like I said, it's not really particularly sexual, so if that's something you're worried about, I probably wouldn't worry about it. But I know that some people felt differently about it. Like, Dia read it as well, and she was kind of like, ugh. They gave her the cringe. It's some scenes it did. So, but to me, it didn't seem overtly sexual. I just know that in the past, women wrote and felt and acted towards each other in a way that we would probably interpret as like kind of sexual, but it wasn't to them. It wasn't like they would talk to each other like they were lovers, but they weren't actually lovers, you know, if that makes sense. So, yeah, to me, it felt like very normal for the period kind of a thing. So yeah, it was so creepy though. I loved it. It was great. And it was really fun after having read, the Vampire by John William Polidori. It was really fun to follow it up with this and now be reading Dracula and also be reading the Twilight series right now. It's just, oh, it's so fun. So much vampirism. So I'm loving learning about all of the metaphors that vampires have stood for throughout literature. I don't really know what Carmilla means though. Like, there wasn't really a particular overt meaning to me behind Carmilla. It was like more of like a fun story. I really didn't get anything out of it like that, oh yeah, he was trying to say this, you know, about anything. Like, there was really no statement being made. It was just a scary story. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. Next we have Crying in H-Mart by, I didn't write it down. So Michelle Zauner, I think. She is the lead singer and I think creator of the band Japanese Breakfast. And so she's an American rock star, but she is Korean American. And this is following it's her memoir about the death of her mother and her time with her mother. And there was some really great food writing. There's some amazing writing about grief. I DNF'd it though, not because there's anything wrong with it, but because it was really heartbreaking to sort of have a peek in on this super vulnerable period of her family's history. And when that family has no Christ at all in it, it's so broken and there's no peace and it was terrible. And I just decided I'm really not enjoying this and I don't think I'm getting much out of it. So I just decided I was going to DNF it, but a memoir. And there will be tears if you read or listen to this memoir. And I definitely wouldn't say it's bad. It's just probably not for me at the moment. But yeah, fascinating. Enjoyed it well enough. Okay. I also reread the second half of Nothing to Envy this month because I finished it physically, I think finished it on audiobook, I think last month. And I enjoyed it so much. I learned so much that I just decided this is one of my favorite books of the year. I want to read it all physically. So I went back and I reread it. National Book Award finalist. This was fabulous. And it's got to be like 20 years old now. 10 years old? I think it was written in 2008. I'm pretty sure. Yeah, published in 2009. So, 15 years old? I don't know. Math? I don't know math. So anyways, this is about, well, I already described it, but it's about several North Korean defectors. Does she say how many she follows? Ordinary Lives in North Korea. I think it follows 6 North Korean defectors, some of whom knew each other in North Korea. And the journalist, Barbara Demick, does such a good job portraying the history of North Korea and the economics of North Korea and kind of a portrait of what many North Korean defectors are feeling, thinking, and living like in South Korea, in China, and other areas. This was so gripping to me. I would highly recommend it. Even if you're not like a North Korean defector memoir obsessed person the way I am, I feel like this would be a great overview type book because it's not one person's story. It's 6 people's story, and Barbara Demick researched so heavily everything that she put in here that I just would say, yeah, I would highly recommend this. It was so fascinating. It's so good. So definitely one of my favorites of the year. Had to physically read the end of it. And then comes a whole bunch of fiction that I finished. I did not catch up with my nonfiction reading by the end of the month, but I am working on a lot of things for next month. So I have lots of nonfiction plans for next month. So another thing that I finished was Halloween Party by Agathie Christie, which is also known as A Haunting in Venice. Sorry, I'm just trying to pull it up. I should have done this ahead of time. Sorry. So there you go. I listened to this on audiobook. I don't necessarily think I would recommend the experience of listening to it on audiobook. Not because there's anything wrong with the audiobook at all, but because I couldn't follow who all the people were, and I just would, like, by the end I was like, oh yeah, who was that? I don't even know who these people are that they're describing. So some of them, was it Death on the Nile? I listened to a couple Agathie Christie's and they were great on audio. I had no problem really following it, and the ending surprised me, but I knew who everybody was. But in this case, I could not follow who everybody was. And there was a lot of sort of cringy things, like describing as a 13-year-old as sexually developed. I don't know. There was some weird stuff in it. I still really enjoyed it, though. I think I would... I really want to see the movie, which is why I read this, of course. So I'm hoping I get to see that. I don't know if I'll get to see it while it's in theaters. It might have to be after it comes back from theaters. Out on DVD and stuff, streaming. So, but I enjoyed it. I'd probably rate it like 3 stars. I can't really rate it well because I just could not understand what's happening at the end. So, next, Monster Volume 4, I finished finally. I don't have that up here, and I won't describe it again because I've described that a lot of times. So, enjoying that series still. One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich. I'm not going to pull this one up. You guys probably know what that is. That is a book by the author of the Gulag Archipelago, Aleksandr Solzhenitsyn. And basically, it's one day in the life of somebody who is in the Gulag. He's an older gentleman, a father, and a husband who was put in the Gulag for 10 years for no reason. It comes out he was just tortured into giving a confession, and he's not actually guilty of anything. And I think this really caused a stir when it first came out because people did not know what the inside of a gulag looked like. But it was like pretty horrifying. The way people are just starving or freezing to death or dying of like very treatable things because nobody cares. They are prisoners. So yeah, it was a really good look into what a gulag camp would look like. For me, it wasn't super gripping because it wasn't a traditional novel. Like, it really just felt like a memoir, except we were kind of a step removed. I thought the Gulag Archipelago was actually gripping and incredibly quotable. The One Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, while much shorter and more accessible for that reason, I did not find it as gripping. I finished it on audio, and I am not really tempted to go back and reread it physically. as I am with the Gulaga Archipelago. I definitely want to go back and finish reading that one physically. And yeah, I guess that's what I would say. I would say the Gulaga Archipelago was a lot more influential for me personally. But we read this for my final book club pick. For the Short Classics for Charity Club. By the way, thank you so much if you're one of those people who is reading along with our club and coming to the Zooms. It was a really good time, and I'm so glad that we had this book club this year. And I will let you know if I end up doing like a quarterly pick or something next year, but at this point, I do not feel like planning anything else because I have a lot of plans already. So yeah, I think that was well worth reading with the group because the discussion, of course, was great. The discussions are always great. It's always worth reading something just for the discussion sometimes. You know, a lot of times, even if it's not a book that was like a 5-star read or whatever, if I read it with a group, it's probably worth reading because the discussion is worth it. So thank you so much for joining me for that. And the last thing that I finished was Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. Yay, I finished it. So I've now read the first 2 books in the series recently, after Legendary Readathon. And I think I would rate this one definitely lower than I would rate the second one. The second one was so moody and fun and emo, and I just loved book 2 so much. Book 1, I loved 75% of it, and then the last 25% I found more troubling because of the way the adults were treating Bella, like she was a child. I mean, she was 16, but she acts like an adult throughout most of the book, so it was just very jarring the way they treated her as if she doesn't know, as if they know what's best for her, and they are people who have known her a couple months, you know? So, and not even like telling your father what's going on. I understand there's extenuating circumstances, but it was weird. And the fact that this reread really kind of drove home what people say about Twilight to me. That it is like unhealthy and uncomfortable, that there are 2 teenagers who've just known each other a couple months and they are ready to die for each other, you know? I would definitely agree with that take. Because of the last 25% of this book, it's uncomfortable. Yeah, but I enjoyed the first 75% so much because they're just falling in love. They're just being teenagers, and everything does feel like it's the most important moment of your life when you have a romance in your teens. So it just really captures teenagehood well in a lot of that ways. This is what teenagehood felt like for me. I was riveted by these books as a teenager. So I really did enjoy most of this reread, and I really enjoyed talking about it with Victoria. So we're going to try reading Eclipse next month. So we'll see how that goes. I think I forgot to write that down on my TBR. I should do that right now. But yeah, if I had read Twilight if I had reread Twilight before I had reread New Moon, I don't know if I would have continued the series because the ending was just like, I'm not enjoying this at all, and it's making me very uncomfortable. So that's basically it. Okay, that was the last thing I finished. Now, let's move on to the TBR for November. So excited for this. Okay, first of all, I just lost it. Okay, first of all, I'm going to be continuing reading The Neverending Story. I'm loving reading this. The first 25% really reflects the movie. Have you guys ever seen this movie, like as a kid or anything? This is about a boy named Bastien who is kind of like chubby, unpopular, gets teased and made fun of at school. And he finds this really special book at a bookshop and he just steals the book. And he goes up into his school's attic and just sits there and reads the book for hours while everybody else is in school. No adult knows where he is. He's just hiding in the attic reading this book. And it reminded me so much of the movie. I just loved that. He ends up reading this book about a magical land called Fantasia. Is that what it's called? I think in the movie it's called Fantasia. Maybe. But in this translation, it's called Fantastica. So Michael Ende, I think, is a German author. And the translator is Ralph Mannheim. So I don't know what the German word for it would be. So it's just translated in multiple ways, I think. So it's following this magical land where the land is disappearing. It's just disappearing. And the childlike empress calls on Atreyu, who is a young boy in this fantastical world of Fantastica. And she calls him to save Fantasia. So he has to go on a quest. And it's to try and save everybody. And it ends up that he has to bring a human boy's naming of a new name for the empress to like save the land of Fantasia. I'm enjoying it so much. So this is a buddy read with Victoria, and gonna continue that. That's gonna be the first thing I'm working on. And the next thing I will be working on for nonfiction, hopefully I can get back on the nonfiction train now that I'm sleeping better. I was having a lot of trouble sleeping this month, so I just quit reading so much nonfiction because it's really exciting and I love nonfiction. But I think I need some fiction to relax. But hopefully I can get back on the nonfiction train because I have a lot of nonfiction I'm excited to read. So, The Aquariums of Pyongyang is a book that I have on both ebook and audiobook now. I recently hauled it, and I mentioned it in a book haul, and my good friend Joanna and my Bible study buddy Joanna mentioned that she wanted to read it with me. So I was going to show you a picture of the cover, but apparently it's on it's on a different Audible account than the one that I have open right now. So I don't even know what the Aquariums of Pyongyang is referring to. Are there aquariums in Pyongyang, or is this like a metaphor? I have no idea. But because it's about North Korea, I instantly was like, I'm going to buy it and read it, of course. So, Joanna, I'm so glad you jumped on this with me because now we can read it immediately. And this will be for Nonfiction November. I did not actually look at the Nonfiction November prompts at all, but I have lots of nonfiction planned, so I guess I'm participating. So, that's my first nonfiction pick. Although I will probably finish the 5 before that, hopefully. I'm going to continue reading the 5. I'm like 70% through the 5. I should be finishing that very, very soon. Okay, next, Dracula. I should also be finishing that in November, hopefully before too long has passed. So I've read, I think about 20% of Dracula now. I've switched to listening to it on audio while I've been coloring. I've been coloring a lot and listening to audiobooks because of my anxiety. So I've been listening to The Neverending Story and Dracula as I've been coloring this. I just talked about this in a vlog. Just ignore the little bird. I'm trying to use up every inch of my paper, but I'm drawing a Bible verse and kind of some of the imagery from it. And it's just very relaxing. I think I'm going to ask for some more colored pencils for Christmas because I'm just enjoying it so much. So, yeah, really enjoying Dracula. I didn't expect it to be... Dracula in the 5 will be the other picks that I finish. Technically in November, but for Victober. The only thing that I actually finished for Victober was Carmilla. So, but I had so many plans for Victober, but that's what I finished. So, yeah. So Dracula I'm really enjoying. So far, there's been plenty of Dracula, in the beginning at least. I've heard people say that there wasn't that much Dracula in the book, but the beginning has lots, so I'm okay with it. Maybe he kind of disappears after this point. I did not realize that this was a epistolary novel. I didn't realize this was an epistolary novel. But yeah, it's pretty creepy. I'm very curious what's going to happen. So a traveler ends up at the house of Count Dracula and ends up being locked in and he can't escape. And so now his girlfriend is like wandering. His fiance is like, where did he go? Why isn't he writing? So yeah, I'm very intrigued to find out what happens. Now we're in the heads of so many other people, not in their heads, but in their writings. And I'm like, why are we jumping all over the place like this? But I assume it'll come together and I'm really enjoying it. So, next, Heaven by Joni Eareckson Tada. This is a book I will be reading with an IRL friend who's wonderful. I've been meeting with her on Zoom recently, and she said a friend recommended this to her. And she was like, I want to read it. And I was like, I want to read it too. I love Joni Eareckson Tada. So Joni Eareckson Tada is a woman who was paralyzed in her teens. She jumped off a rock into the ocean, and it was not a deep ocean. It was like she hit her head on a rock and it broke her neck or her back. I can't remember exactly, but she's been paralyzed ever since then. And her story is so encouraging to me as somebody who also, she suffers with chronic pain and chronic disability. And yeah, I read another book by her, and I really enjoyed it. I don't even remember what it was now. I think maybe Kate Howe recommended it to me. But anyways, I'm excited to read this. So my friend also has a son who has a chronic illness that's debilitating. And so she wants to, I think, read something that will relate to him. And so I love that. So I was like really thrilled when she was like talking about it. I was like, we should read it together and discuss. And she was like, yeah, that would be great. So I'm excited to have an IRL reading like with a friend. That's so exciting. So next, Nathan Coulter. So this was going to be my book club pick for November, but then I canceled my book club. So, but I guess I'm going to go ahead and read Nathan Coulter because one of my friends, the founder of Families Together, Hope 40, or the Neighbor Program is what it's now called. Did I mention that in a video? That Families Together is now the Neighbor Program, which was its original name, but she renamed it when they switched to a different company, nonprofit. And now they are on a different nonprofit and they are calling themselves the Neighbor Program again. So anyways, she was already halfway through Nathan Coulter because she was looking forward to the book club meeting. So yeah, I just went ahead and said, okay, well, let's still read it and discuss it on Zoom. So yeah, I'm excited that we'll get to do that. It's a very short book. So excited to finally jump into that series by Wendell Berry. I've never really read his fiction at all, but I loved Life is a Miracle, which is an essay he wrote. I took notes on every inch of that essay. So it took me forever to read. But next, The Five, and then Attack on Titan. I forget what volume we're on. Are we on volume 5 with Tiffany? I'm going to be buddy reading that next month, at least probably 1 or 2 volumes. And then next, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. This is a read-along of a memoir that I'm going to be doing for, it's like Nonfiction November, but also Project Gutenberg. And just, I really wanted to read it. So somebody on my Instagram mentioned that they would read it with me, a subscriber. So we're going to be reading it. And yeah, I hope you'll join us. I saw a couple people were interested in reading it. So maybe I should make a chat or something so we can talk about it. I don't know. It is undecided, all the details yet. But definitely planning to read that one early in the month. These are in like a very like loose order of my reading planning to read them. So, but next will be Poor Folk by Dostoevsky, which is a Project Gutenberg group read pick. So yeah, this is the first published work, period, of Dostoevsky, and it is a short novel, and it's a very utopian socialist kind of outlook. It's like a vignette about how people were suffering in St. Petersburg at the time, people who were lower class. So I'm really excited about that. It's supposed to be part of the realist movement. Is that what it's called? I can't remember. Okay, details are flying. I'm getting tired, I think. So I'm gonna hurry through here. Next, I have a nonfiction memoir, Testament of Youth by Vera Brittain. Vera Brittain. She was a nurse during World War I, and this is her memoir about her time there. And this was recommended to me by 2 subscribers, Kurt and Tony both recommended, and then it was chosen as our World War November group pick. So I'm very excited to get to this memoir. Yeah, I'm super excited to check it out. There was a memoir written by a group of, they were like nun nurses. I forget what it was called, but there was like a show on Netflix about them. Do you guys know what I'm talking about? I don't know. I should have Googled it, but I was just thinking about it now. But anyways, I really enjoyed the first season of that show and the first memoir. And I've always kind of wanted to continue it. This is not related to the World Wars at all. It's like when it was set when Britain first instituted socialized medicine. And so there's all these people who've never really taken care of their bodies or health at all. And these women are going into like the really poor areas where, and they're often taking care of like mothers or soon to be mothers who have no idea how to take care of their bodies and their children's bodies. So yeah, fascinating. I'm excited to check out Testament of Youth. Okay, and then for Cryptids read-along, I'm going to read The Meg by Steve Alten. Sharks really fascinate me. They are so ancient. Like, sharks live for such a long time, but the megalodon is what this is about. Is a shark. It's like a prehistoric shark. But this is about, I believe it's just a novel about a man who encounters the Meg, and he's part of a party that's searching this underground volcanic area under the ocean. I don't even remember how to describe it exactly, but I'm also interested in underground volcanoes. So I'm very like, I want to check volcanoes and sharks. I don't know. Fascinating to me. And trains. I just have weird interests sometimes. Regardless, I'm so excited to get to Meg. The megalodon, I think, counts as a cryptid because nobody is believing this man that he's seen the Meg. She's supposed to be like the mother of the great white shark. So they're not supposed to exist anymore, but I think they existed in the past is the idea. I hope that counts as a cryptid. But one of the challenges was to read a water-based cryptid and also your favorite cryptid. I don't know if I have a favorite cryptid. I haven't given it enough thought yet, but this is, when I was looking up books, this is the one that sounded like the most fascinating to me. I'm doing this readathon because of Crystal at Fiber Artsy. Yeah, so I just was watching her TBR. I hope you'll go check out her channel and her videos on this. And I know that there are other co-hosts for this readathon. I apologize for not being a good... Okay, Jason Weirds Reads and Sin's Book Nook are the other hosts. And they have a Discord. And, oh man, she did such a good job with this TBR. Like, she lists all of her picks in the description, which... by the way, takes forever. If you guys ever see all the books I list in my description, that takes a long time to put them all down there. So thank you. I'm going to look through these. So her favorite is the Sasquatch and Bigfoot. And I remember watching movies about Bigfoot when I was a kid. Bigfoot is supposed to be in the Pacific Northwest, which is where I live. So if I wanted to read a book about Bigfoot, it would Harry and the Hendersons. That's what I used to watch. I think that's what it's called. Harry and the Hendersons. That was a movie I think that my dad loved when I was growing up, and he would just crack up over it. So I remember Bigfoot, but I've never read a book about him. But I really was like, and there's a book about Loch Ness Monster. That's always fascinated me, the Loch Ness Monster. So this is such a fun readathon. When I saw that she was doing this, I was like, I have to jump in. She always is part of really fun readathons. And I haven't taken part of one yet. So I was like, this is the one. I'm doing it. I am reading a book about the megalodon. So The Meg by Steve Alten. I'll let you know how it goes. It's supposed to be horror. And as you know, I'm trying to get into horror more because I am loving Attack on Titan so much. I loved Carmilla. I think I like A Touch of Darkness. That's why I like Russian literature. That's why I love Dostoevsky. I just like A Touch of Darkness because it feels like true and real to life. And I just feel like as an adult, having my life go sideways with my chronic illness really makes me want to... But I've always kind of been that way. Even before my chronic illness, I always liked music that had an edge to it. You know, Screamo I loved when I was a teenager. So, I don't know. Just my emo self coming out. Okay, next. Oh, Irreversible Damage. I don't have it sitting out here. I should have brought it back here, but I'll pull it up for you to take a look at. So this is also going to be a buddy read, but I'm not going to mention the person I'm reading it with because they requested silence. So I can absolutely stay silent about that. But Irreversible Damage by Abigail Schreier is... I'm trying to be a little bit more informed about transgender... anything about transgenderism, because it's just such a hot button topic, and I want to be informed about it. I know that there's places in Europe that are now saying you have to be very careful about providing like gender changing drugs, or like gender, what are they called? Gender, development blockers, basically. Because they're seeing like really horrible side effects with some kids. So I really want to kind of hear what's going on about that, but I also understand that mental health is a really big concern with transgender people. There's like a really high rate of suicide with transgender people, so hopefully this isn't triggering for anybody. I am just like an outside observer trying to love on everybody by understanding what they're going through. That's what I'm trying to do. So please forgive me. I have a lot of personal growth to be going through in this area and every other area. So please forgive me if I ever say anything in a video that's really triggering for you. Just know that I love you and I'm trying my best to kind of understand all sides of these like more fraught issues. And I understand that identity is not something that needs to be argued. Your existence is not a point of argument. So I'm just trying to understand the issues, basically, what people are concerned about. I want to hear all sides of the issue. So that's one. Another thing that I wanted to pull up, I should have brought this one in too. I'm not very prepared, as you might be able to tell here, but Q-teen-84 by Haruki Murakami. It's not coming up. So this is a dystopian kind of, is it a thriller? I don't really know. I read it. It's very like noir feeling, and it's Haruki Murakami is a Japanese author, but this book feels very like American. So I don't know. I loved it. I gave it though like a 50% because of the way he writes about women. It's like really, really cringy the way he writes about women. It's really very cringy. But also, his main character is a woman, and it's a giant book, and he's writing it from her perspective. So, I don't know. He's trying. He was sure trying. And she's an interesting character. So, yeah, I'm excited to reread this. I'm rereading this. I was thinking about doing a read-along of this in November, December, and January with Alana Estelle and Michi. From Michi Reviews and Heart of Michi. But I think our schedules were a little bit too cramped to actually do a read-along, but we're going to do a discussion of this hopefully in February. So if you guys want to read it with us, we'll be discussing it in February. I'm going to be rereading it. Michi's going to be rereading it. Alana just finished it, and there's a great review of it on her channel. I actually haven't watched it yet, but because we know Alana, we know it's a great review, right? So, yeah, that's a plan for November. I'm going to be starting it. I'm also going to be starting Spare by Prince Harry, which is Victoria's Patreon book club pick for November. Man, her Patreon book club picks are just fire. I'm like so interested by everything that gets picked. So how things are decided for her Patreon, I'm pulling it up so that you can see the cover, but you all probably know about Spare. Things are decided by, first we all throw out a bunch of genres that we'd be interested in reading next month. And then she spins a wheel and the genre gets chosen. And then we all throw out books that fit that genre. And then she spins the wheel on the choices of the genre. So memoir was the chosen genre for November. And Spare by Prince Harry was the winner of that spin of all the titles that were thrown out. So I did throw out Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. I was hoping that would win because I really want to read that, but it didn't win. So I'm going to do my best to read Spare. I know it's quite long, and I know it's quite... I don't know if it's going to be my thing, but I am interested to learn a little bit. I absolutely know nothing about the royal family. Literally nothing. So, next Melindy book. Yes, I'll be reading And Then There Were Five by Elizabeth Enright with Tiffany from Beautiful Minutia and Claire, her daughter. I'm so excited to be continuing the series with them. And Then There Were Five is my favorite of the series. Yeah. I'm not even going to talk about it anymore. I'm just so excited about it. So, and then I read not quite a bit. I probably read 60 or so pages of the memoirs of Lady Hyegyong. Maybe that's probably even too many, 50. Last month. I was doing really well with it. I was so proud of myself. I was doing well. And then the book went back to the library. So there's an ebook out from the library that I'm having it read along. But a lot of it I'm also just reading it physically without even listening to the audiobook because it's pretty readable. I'm enjoying this so much. This is by a Korean princess during the Joseon dynasty in Korea, and she is writing about her life. She married Prince Sado, who was a prince who developed mental health issues later in his life, in like his 20s, and his father demoted him to a peasant, executed him by stuffing him in a rice chest for 6 days, and then she was demoted basically to save her life and the life of her children by her father-in-law because he didn't want to have to execute the whole family. He just wanted to execute Prince Sado. I don't even know why Prince Sado was killed, but it was something to do with his mental health concerns. It sounds like maybe he was violent, like he might have killed some servants or something. But anyways, obviously a very traumatic event, and we're hearing this from her perspective, and but she has like a long life. I think how old is she when she's writing this? Like 60 or 70? I don't even know. She's quite an old woman when she's writing these memoirs. So I'm like riveted. Thank you so much to Emma from Bookish Princess for mentioning this because it's been on my radar ever since and I'm finally getting to it. So this is a buddy read with Tiffany from Beautiful Minutia and Joanna, the one that I'm buddy reading Aquariums of Pyongyang with. They're both Korea fanatics like I am. So, okay. Next, fiction, All Quiet on the Western Front. We'll see if I can get to this. This is a fiction book about World War I from the German perspective. And that's all I know about it, except I think it's Trump's favorite book as well. I heard that about it too. But I've heard it's really fantastic. This was one of Peg from the History Shelf's recommendations for World War November. So that's what I'm hoping to pick that up for my fiction. And I also there was a Christina Rossetti biography that Kate mentioned reading together for Nonfiction November, so we might do that. I don't know. I haven't talked to her about it. Pillars of the House, I want to continue. And Eclipse, I think I mentioned that already. Yeah. Okay, that is all. I do have some other things that I have like my eye on, like Notes from the Underground and Demons, but that will depend on how quickly I finish Poor Folk. So those are my plans for next month. So thanks so much for watching this video and sticking around. I know it's a long one. These always are, these wrap-ups and TBRs. So yeah, let me know what you're planning to read in November, and I'll talk to you soon.